Polk Reserve 200 is a great bookshelf speaker. So when I saw it on sale for 500 US dollars, I just had to buy it. Right now, I'm preparing a thorough review of those speakers. But in the meantime, I came across something interesting that I wanted to share with you. When doing the research about the speakers, I used an interesting AI tool that helped me digest the most popular reviews on YouTube about those speakers. And the result was quite interesting. It has a form of a conversation between two people, like a podcast, discussing what other reviewers said about those speakers, what they liked and what they did not like. If you want to know what AI tool I used, I will discuss it at the end of the video. I'm also interested in your opinion about AI tools and how you use them for product research, if you use them at all. And right now, you're welcome to listen to what an AI tool has to say about Paul R200.
Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive all about the Polk Reserve R200 bookshelf speakers.
Nice.
We've got a whole bunch of YouTube reviews you wanted us to go through, and
Awesome.
yeah, YouTube's great for this kind of thing. Those reviewers don't hold back.
True. Real world opinions.
Exact.
Straight from a source.
And you seem really curious about these speakers. Do they really live up to all the hype?
That's the big question.
I gotta admit, I'm pretty curious myself.
Yeah.
Especially because Polk is known more for their home theater systems,
Right.
not necessarily for like super high-end audiophile speakers.
Definitely. More of the home theater side.
Yeah. So could the R200 be like a hidden gem in their lineup?
That's what we're going to find out. And, one thing that jumps out right away from these reviews is the connection to Polk's flagship Legends series.
Oh yeah, you're talking about that trickle-down technology.
Exactly. Like you might be getting that a legend-like performance, but without the crazy price tag.
Okay, that's already got me hooked, but hold on, let me make sure I'm following.
Sure.
So these R200s, they use the same tweeter and that, what was it, the cone?
Turbine cone.
Turbine cone, yeah.
As the Legends series.
But what does all that fancy jargon actually mean for the sound?
So picture this, right? You've got the tweeter. That little guy handles the high frequencies, like those shimmery cymbals or like really crisp vocals.
Okay.
And this tweeter is designed with a ring-shaped diaphragm. Think like a tiny speaker with a ring around it.
Okay.
And that helps spread the sound out wider, so you don't have to be sitting in like this one perfect spot to hear everything properly.
I get it. Wider sweet spot.
Exactly. Now, the turbine cone, that's the heart of the speaker. It's pumping out those mids and lows, giving you the fullness and the punch.
Right.
And it's got these little turbine-like blades on the cone, and these help it to move air more efficiently, so the sound is more controlled, more responsive.
So it's not just about looking cool. There's some serious engineering going on.
Absolutely form and function, right?
Yeah, I'm speaking of function. These speakers are getting rave reviews for their bass. One reviewer even compared it to hitting like a leathery hammer.
I saw that.
What a wild way to describe it.
Yeah, that one's definitely memorable. But it speaks to what a lot of reviewers are saying. The bass on these R200s is deep, it's punchy, like shockingly so for a bookshelf speaker.
Wow, some reviewers even said they might not need a subwoofer.
Right. That's pretty amazing considering the size.
Now, I gotta ask.
Yeah.
I have a pretty small listening room.
Okay.
Would that much bass be too much? Like, would it get all boomy in there?
That's a good point. A few reviewers with smaller rooms did mention that. They said they had to be careful with speaker placement, like pulling them away from the wall a bit to minimize the boominess.
Okay, so placement is key.
Always is.
And speaking of placement, these speakers have that funky export on the back, right?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of looks like a mini jet engine.
I know some reviewers had a field day with that, but it actually serves a real purpose. It helps with a common problem with ported speakers. Port noise.
Port noise.
Yeah, ported speakers have those openings, the ports that enhance the bass.
Right.
But sometimes those ports can create a chuffing sound or like a whooshing, especially when you crank up the volume.
Oh, I've heard that before.
Yeah, it's not a most pleasant sound.
Not ideal.
So the export, it's designed to smooth out the airflow coming from the port. So you get all the benefits of that punchy bass
Oh, okay.
without the annoying chuffing.
Very clever. All right, so we've covered the bass. What about the mid-range?
Yeah.
That's where most of the instruments and vocals live, right?
Absolutely crucial. And from the reviews, the consensus seems to be the R200's mid-range is neutral, detailed, and warm.
Oh, okay, so you're saying they're easy to listen to for long periods.
That seems to be the general feeling. Reviewers kept talking about how realistic the instrument sounded, how clear the vocals were, like you could really hear all the nuances.
Nice. And did any specific sonic qualities stand out to the reviewers?
Yeah, many reviewers mentioned that the R200 does a great job with instrument separation so you can hear each instrument clearly, even in a really busy mix. They also loved the way the R200 captured the texture of different instruments, like you could really hear the pluck of a guitar string or the breckiness of a sax.
So it's a detailed presentation, but not overly analytical or anything.
Exactly. It's detailed, but still musical and enjoyable. Now, there was one little thing that some reviewers mentioned.
Okay.
A few people picked up on a potential glare around the 1 kilohertz frequency.
Glare. What does that even mean?
Basically, it means that some sounds in that frequency range might be a bit emphasized, a little too prominent.
Huh. Interesting. Did any reviewers mention specific examples?
Yeah, one reviewer actually pointed it out in the triangle during Steve Winwood's Higher Love.
Ooh, okay. Specific.
Right. Funny how these things stick out. But most reviewers didn't seem to think it was a major issue. It was more of a subtle thing that some people noticed, others didn't.
Gotcha. So something to be aware of, but not necessarily a deal breaker.
Exactly. All right, so we've tackled the bass, we've explored the mid-range.
Now it's time for the highs, the treble.
You got it. And this is one area where the R200 really shines. Reviewers were raving about how smooth the treble is.
Oh, nice.
No harshness, no sibilance. They said you could listen for hours without experiencing any fatigue.
No ear fatigue. That's always a good sign.
Right. Especially compared to some brands that are known for a brighter, more forward treble.
Yeah, like clips or focal. Those could be a bit harsh sometimes.
Totally. But gotta be honest, some reviewers did say the R200 might not be the absolute most revealing or analytical when it comes to treble detail. Like compared to some super detail speakers, the treble on the R200 might sound a tad dull.
So it's a trade-off, right?
Yeah, sometimes you have to choose between detail and smoothness.
And it sounds like Polk went for smoothness with the R200.
Which makes sense if they're going for that fatigue-free listening experience.
Yeah, makes sense. And one reviewer made a really interesting comparison.
Yeah.
They said the treble is like a mix of both a soft dome tweeter and an AMT tweeter.
Oh, I saw that. That's a fascinating observation. It's like getting the best of both worlds.
Right. It's like they blended the sonic characteristics of both types of tweeters to create something unique.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the bass, the mids, the highs. But now let's get to the really fun stuff, soundstage and imaging.
Let's do it.
How immersive is the listening experience with these speakers?
You ready to be transported? Because reviewers were seriously impressed with the R200's soundstage. They described it as wide, expensive, with sound extending beyond the speakers themselves. Like, you're not just hearing the music coming from two boxes.
Whoa.
You're surrounded by it.
That's the magic of a good soundstage. You feel like you're right there in the performance space.
And the reviewers definitely felt that. They talked about feeling like they were in the room with the musicians or like they were transported to a concert hall.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, what about imaging?
Okay, so imaging, that's all about how precisely the speakers place individual sounds within the soundstage. And according to the reviews, the R200's imaging is good,
Okay.
but may not quite as precise as some higher-end speakers out there.
So not laser focused on every instrument.
Maybe not laser focused, but still very good for the price point.
All right, that's fair. Now let's talk about power and dynamics.
All right.
Can these speakers handle demanding music, movie soundtracks? Do they have that fun factor?
Oh, absolutely. Reviewers were really impressed with how dynamic and engaging the R200 sound, especially for movies. They really brought action sequences to life with impactful explosions and a sense of scale that you wouldn't expect from bookshelf speakers.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially with all that bass we were talking about earlier. But speaking of power, I noticed the R200 has an 86 dB sensitivity and a 4 ohm impedance. What does that mean for someone who's, well, not an audio engineer?
Good question. So sensitivity, basically it tells you how much volume the speaker can produce with a given amount of power from your amplifier. And 86 dB, that's considered on the lower end.
Okay.
Which means you'll need a decent amp to really make these speakers sing.
So they need a bit of juice to shine.
Exactly.
And what about that 4 ohm impedance?
So impedance, think of it like electrical resistance. A lower impedance, like 4 ohms, means the speaker will draw more current from the amplifier.
Okay.
So you need an amplifier that can handle that extra draw.
Got it. So not just any amp will do.
It's important to do your research and make sure your amp and speakers are a good match.
And one reviewer said that the R200s really sprang to life when paired with a powerful amp.
I bet. The right amp can make a huge difference. It's all about synergy.
All right, let's switch gears a bit.
Sure.
Let's talk aesthetics and build. Looks matter, right?
They do, and the R200 keeps it pretty clean and minimalist. which a lot of reviewers appreciated. It's not flashy, it's more like sleek and understated. One thing that stood out, though, are the rounded cabinet edges.
Oh yeah, those rounded edges. Do they serve a purpose besides just looking cool?
Actually, yeah, they help minimize diffraction, which is basically when sound waves scatter as they hit the edges of the speaker cabinet. So the rounded edges help to create a smoother, more accurate sound.
Ah, so it's not just about looks, it's functional too.
Exactly. And remember that jet engine look we were talking about earlier with the turbine cone and the export?
Haha, yeah.
Some reviewers had a lot of fun with that, but hey, at least it's distinctive. And thankfully, Polk offers the R200 in a few different finishes.
Oh, that's good.
Black, white, and walnut.
Okay, so you can choose the one that best fits your style. So we've talked about the design, the technology, the sound, but how does the R200 actually stack up against the competition?
That's the big question, right?
The speaker market is packed with options.
It really is. And from the reviews you sent, it looks like you want to see how the R200 compares to a whole bunch of different speakers.
We're talking ELAC, Klipsch, Warfadale, B&W, KEF, even Sonus Faber.
Wow, that's quite the lineup, from budget-friendly to high-end audiophile brands.
Some reviewers were even calling the R200 a giant killer.
Bold claim.
So, did it live up to the hype? Did it hold its own against these heavy hitters?
Well, from what I've seen, the R200 consistently impressed. It held its own and, in some cases, even outperformed some of the more expensive competition.
Wow, that's impressive.
Especially when it came to bass performance and overall value for the money.
Okay, I'm ready for this comparison showdown.
Me too. Let's dive in and see how the R200 stacks up against each of these competitors.
This is going to be good. Okay, so it's comparison time.
Yeah, let's do it.
And first up, we've got ELAC. They're really popular in this price range. You wanted to see how the R200 compares to their debut reference and the Unify 2.0.
Great choices. The debut reference is like the go-to for a lot of people starting out with audiophile speakers.
Yeah, they have good reputation.
Super balanced sound, affordable.
Yeah.
It's a solid pick. And actually, several reviewers who compared it head-to-head with the R200, they actually preferred the Polk.
Oh, wow.
Especially when it came to the bass, they felt the R200 just had more impact, more oomph in the low end.
So advantage Polk for bass. All right, now what about the Unify 2.0?
Okay, so the Unify 2.0, that's a step up in ELAC's lineup.
Yeah, it's a bit more expensive.
More refined. Reviewers love its detail, how transparent and neutral it sounds.
But did it beat the R200?
Well, here's the thing. Some reviewers felt like it was missing a bit of the fun factor.
Fun factor?
Yeah, like that excitement, that energy that the R200 brings, especially for genres like rock or pop or electronic music.
Oh, I see. So if you want a more lively, engaging sound...
The R200 might be a better choice.
Makes sense. Okay, next up is a legend, the Klipsch RP600M.
Oh, yeah, the RP600M. Everybody knows those.
How did the R200 fare against this one?
So the RP600M, classic Klipsch sound, bright, forward,
A little shouty.
some might say. That horn-loaded tweeter, it gives it that lively, energetic presentation that Klipsch is known for. But that can be a bit much for some people, especially over long listening sessions.
I get it.
Can get a bit fatiguing.
Yeah.
And that's where the R200 takes a different approach. Reviewers consistently highlighted how smooth and balanced the Polk sounds.
Okay.
Especially in the treble. Much easier on the ears for hours of listening.
So it really comes down to personal preference then.
Yeah, if you love that bright, energetic Klipsch sound, go for it.
Yeah.
But if you want something a little more laid back, a little more relaxed.
The R200 might be a better fit.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on to Warfale. They're known for their great value speakers.
Absolutely.
We've got the Diamond 12.1 and the Evo 4.1 on the list to compare.
Awesome. The Diamond 12.1, that's a classic budget audiophile pick.
Yeah.
And honestly, reviewers who compared it to the R200, they found them surprisingly similar in terms of overall tonality. Both really balanced and enjoyable, but some gave a slight edge to the Polk for the bass and the dynamics.
So close match, but the R200 has a bit more oomph.
It seems that way. Now, the Evo 4.1, that's a step up from Warfadale. More refined, a bit pricier.
Yeah.
And the reviews were glowing refined sound, great detail, beautiful build.
Did the R200 even stand a chance?
It's a tough competitor, but the R200 held its own. Reviewers were still really impressed by its bass performance, how dynamic it sounded, especially for movies and music with a lot of energy.
Okay, so the R200's hanging in there, even against these pricier options. Now let's move on to some higher-end brands, starting with B&W.
All right.
Specifically, the 600 Series Anniversary Edition. I'm curious how the R200 compares to that.
So the B&W 600 series, that's a classic for a reason. Refined sound, articulate bass, detailed treble.
Yeah.
It's a speaker that a lot of people aspire to own.
So how did the little R200 measure up?
This is where things get interesting. Some reviewers actually preferred the Polk.
What?
They found the B&W a little too forward, a little too bright, even to the point of being fatiguing.
Oh, wow.
Whereas the R200, with its smoother, more laid-back sound, it was actually more enjoyable for long listening sessions.
So the R200's balanced sound really shined through in that comparison. All right, next up, another audio giant, KEF. You wanted to know about the Q350 and the legendary LS50.
Oh yeah, KEF, the Q350, that's a really popular choice in the mid-range. Known for its clarity and those unique UniQ drivers where the tweeter is right in the middle of the mid-range driver.
Right, for better imaging, right?
Exactly. And reviewers who compared it to the R200, they often gave the edge to the KEF for imaging and detail.
Okay.
But they also said that the R200 had a wider soundstage and a more powerful bass response, so it was more immersive, more engaging, especially for movies and music with a lot of low-end energy.
So again, it comes down to what you're prioritizing.
Exactly. Now, the LS50, that's a whole other story.
Yeah, the LS50 is iconic.
Considered one of the best bookshelf speakers ever made.
But it's also pretty expensive.
Oh, yeah. And it can be a bit demanding on the amplifier. You need a really good amp to get the most out of it.
Whereas the R200 is a little more forgiving in that department.
For sure. You don't need to spend a fortune on an amp to make it sound good. And while the LS50 might be more accurate, more detailed,
Right.
a lot of reviewers actually found the R200 more enjoyable overall. That wider soundstage, the impactful bass, it just made for a more immersive, fun listening experience.
So even against a legend like the LS50, the R200 is still holding its own.
It really is.
All right, let's wrap up these comparisons with Sonus Faber.
Sonus Faber.
You wanted to know how the R200 stacks up against the Lumina 2.
So Sonus Faber, they're known for their beautiful craftsmanship, that Italian flair. And the Lumina 2, it's a gorgeous speaker, both in looks and sound. Very refined, elegant presentation.
Okay.
Really focuses on musicality and detail.
So how did the R200 compare to this Italian stallion?
Well, reviewers who compared them were actually surprised by how well the Polk did. While the Lumina 2 might be a bit more refined, a bit more nuanced,
Okay.
the R200 had that punchier bass, more dynamic presentation, and of course, it's significantly more affordable.
It's like the R200 is this underdog that keeps taking on these audiophile favorites and holding its own.
Exactly. And it raises a really interesting question. Is good enough actually good enough?
You mean like, do we always need to chase the absolute best, most expensive gear?
Yeah, is there a point where we can just enjoy the music, enjoy the movies without obsessing over every little detail?
That's a great point. And a lot of the reviewers, they said that the R200 made them question whether those expensive upgrades were really worth it.
It makes you think. Maybe we don't always need the best of the best. Maybe good enough is actually more than enough.
Especially when good enough sounds as good as the R200 seems to.
Exactly.
So we've covered a ton of comparisons.
We have.
But before we move on, are there any other key takeaways from the reviews that we should highlight? Anything else about the R200 that stood out?
Yeah, one thing that came up again and again was the R200's versatility.
Versatility.
Reviewers loved how well it handled both music and movies.
Oh, that's awesome.
Like equally capable of playing a classical concerto and then switching to a blockbuster action movie.
A true all-arounder.
And they were specific too. For music, they talked about the R200's ability to convey the emotion, the energy of the performance. They loved the detail, the wide soundstage, just how musical it sounded overall.
Cool.
A lot of them said they were rediscovering their favorite albums, hearing things they'd never noticed before.
And for movies.
They were blown away by the dynamics, how it handled those big, explosive moments without any distortion. That immersive soundstage really put you right in the middle of the action.
That's where that powerful bass comes in handy.
You got it. Several reviewers said they might not even need a separate subwoofer.
Wow. Okay, so it sounds like the R200 can really do it all. But are there any situations where it might not be the best choice?
That's a good question, because you're right, no speaker is perfect for everyone.
Right.
For example, if you're like a super hardcore audiophile where absolute detail and neutrality are the most important things, there might be other speakers that would be a better fit.
Like for the ultra-critical listener who wants to hear every tiny nuance?
Exactly. And remember that potential glare in the mid-range we talked about?
Yeah.
It's subtle, but if you're really sensitive to that frequency range, it might be worth listening to the R200 in person before you buy.
Yeah, good point. And even though the bass gets a lot of praise, if you have a small room, you might need to play around with placement or even consider some room treatments to avoid it getting too boomy.
Placement is always key. A few reviewers recommended pulling the speakers away from the wall, maybe adding some acoustic panels.
Those little tweaks can make a big difference. Okay, so overall, it seems like the R200 offers an incredible balance of performance, features, and value.
For sure. It's really shaking things up in the speaker world.
And it brings us back to that question of good enough.
Right.
Is it really enough? Because the R200 seems to be challenging the idea that you have to spend a ton of money to get a truly satisfying listening experience?
It's a good question to ask ourselves. What are we really looking for in a speaker? Do we need the absolute best, or can we be happy with something that sounds great and doesn't break the bank?
It's like anything in life, right? We can always chase the next best thing,
Always.
but at what cost? And the R200 is making a lot of people rethinking their priorities.
It is. It's a reminder that sometimes good enough is more than enough, especially when good enough is this good.
So with that in mind, let's shift gears and talk about you, the listener.
Okay.
What are you looking for in a speaker? What are your top priorities? Because what matters most is finding the right speaker for you.
Absolutely. It's all about your needs, your preferences, your listening space.
Right. So think about it. Are you primarily a music lover or more of a movie buff?
Or do you need a speaker that can handle both with equal finesse?
Exactly. And thinking about your space, is it a smaller room?
Because if it is, that bass might need a little extra attention.
Yeah, we talked about how placement can be crucial.
Gotta tame that boom.
Now, remember that whole discussion about the R200 being good enough?
Oh, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
It's a good question to ponder.
Are you the type who always needs the absolute best, most cutting-edge gear?
The top of the line.
Yeah, or are you more focused on finding something that sounds great, that you enjoy,
Yeah.
without having to spend a fortune?
Because a lot of those reviewers, they were saying that the R200 made them question whether those expensive upgrades were really necessary.
Like, is chasing those last few percentage points of performance really worth it?
Especially when you have a speaker like the R200 that seems to tick so many boxes.
It's a good point. Maybe we sometimes get too caught up in the specs and the hype,
Right.
and we forget to just enjoy the music.
The joy of listening.
So thinking about all of this,
Yeah.
where do you land on the R200? Does it seem like a speaker that aligns with what you're looking for?
It's definitely a compelling option based on everything we've learned from these reviews.
It seems to perform well above its price point.
It does. Music, movies.
Versatile.
Sounds like a winner.
It really does challenge those preconceived notions about what a budget-friendly speaker can sound like.
It's proving that you don't have to break the bank to get great sound.
Exactly. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this whole deep dive.
What's that?
Trust your ears. Don't let the specs and the reviews be the only deciding factor. The best speaker for you is the one that you enjoy listening to the most.
The one that brings you joy.
Exactly. So if the R200 has piqued your interest, go check it out. Give it a listen. See if it speaks to you.
You might be surprised by what you hear.
Absolutely. The world of audio is full of surprises.
That's the fun of it.
Keep exploring, keep listening, keep those ears open for new discoveries.
Always.
And that wraps up our deep dive into the Polk Reserve R200. We hope you enjoyed it,
Thanks for listening.
and we'll catch you next time for another audio adventure.
The tool I used is called Notebook LM from Google, and it helps you research certain topics more thoroughly than standard LLM models like ChatGPT, Google Gemini, or Grok, for example. It only extracts information from the sources that you upload to it, so it does not hallucinate as much as those popular LLMs, and produces much better results. So you can extract information from PDFs, from websites, but being a Google tool, it can also analyze videos on YouTube. And this is what I did. I fed it with links to several YouTube reviews of the Polk Reserve 200 from Cheap Audio Man, New Record Day, Erin's Audio Corner, and the like. And it's created an sort of analysis or digest of those reviews in a form of a conversation between two people. I hope you found this conversation interesting and informative. I definitely found it intriguing, probably because I'm in a tech industry and I follow the developments of artificial intelligence applications in our daily life pretty closely. And having said that, I promise I will do a proper human-based review of the Polk Reserve 200s very soon. So subscribe to this channel if you want to follow me, and if you want to know what humans have to say about audio gear. Until next time, bye.